Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Afrika Owes, and I am a KIPP alumna and an administrative associate at the Center for Constitutional Rights. I'm also a community leader in the best unofficial official borough in New York City, Harlem. It's great to be with all of you today. It's been a powerful morning, and I am so glad that we heard from Artemisio Romero y Caver could join us today and show us what it means to be a young activist on the right side of history. It is always such a privilege to hear from students. And the keynote from DeRay McKenson and Trey Johnson just set a new standard for the types of unfiltered conversations that we need to be having in our schools and communities to bring forth both healing and racial reconciliation. We have already witnessed so much good content, and we are all just getting started. So thank you again for being here. I hope everyone was able to grab some refreshments and a snack during intermission because we have one more featured session for you today. Up next, I want to welcome a fellow warrior for equity and education, Shavar Jeffries, President of Democrats for Education Reform. He is joined by Margaret Fortune, President and CEO of Fortune Schools, and Layla Avila, CEO and Executive Director of Education Leaders of Color. Up next, I will moderate a session with this rockstar group of panelists titled Equity in Education, Realities and Strategies for Change. Sit back and please enjoy this session. So to start us off, all of you have contributed to education reform in various ways, whether it's policy, in the classroom, creating nonprofits, your own schools, etc. All of your involvement have had an overlapping thread and theme focusing on school leadership and pipeline programs for teachers to become leaders. Can you describe your leadership philosophy in the context of education?
Afrika, I'll jump in. We believe at Fortune School in the 5 pillars. That means high expectations, choice and commitment, more time, focus on results, and citizenship. So in my leadership, I try to stay within those values. One of the things that I think, though, is the most important thing I can do as a leader is to develop others. I think in the academy, when you look back at your contribution, for me, it's about the people that you brought into education and the impact that they had, so that you're constantly, in a very intentional way, developing the next generation of leaders. And I always do that with an eye for diversity, for bringing in those who might be held down under glass ceilings, and giving them the opportunity that they may not get in another institution to really cultivate their leadership.
Thank you, Margaret. Shavar or Layla, do either of you want to answer this question?
Sure. So at Education Leaders of Color, our work is all about supporting and developing leaders of color to serve Black and Latino communities. And for us, in terms of our leadership, our values are foundational to everything that we do. And so our work is to ensure that we are proliferating the field with values-aligned leaders of color. And for our values, we really focus on 5 things. One is a focus on ending generational poverty. So we know that test scores matter, but really what the end game is to interrupt generational poverty in Black and brown communities. We want to create sustainable change, which means that we're working closely with communities and working to improve schools with them rather than doing reform to them. We work to ensure that we are creating the kinds of schools that we would want for all children, including our own. We work to ensure that we are embracing multiple options so that we're doing away with the polarization in education and not falling into this idea that we have some false choices. And then the last thing is that we try to work to develop leaders who are going to go beyond education, which means that are supporting and advancing policies that affect how kids show up in school every day. The kinds of policies that affect poverty rates, that affect housing, that affect health, because we know that students, like adults, lead intersectional lives, and we need to focus on multiple ways of helping to support them so that when they show up to school, they can meet their full potential.
Thank you. Shavar, do you want to answer this question?
Yes, Democrats for Education Reform, we engage in policy making to shape education policy at the federal, state, and local level so that it's more amenable to the types of practices at the school level that will frankly bring about equity for low-income students, students of color, students who speak English as a second language, and students with disabilities. And so equity for students from those groups is at the heart of what we do. We're really committed to following the data and the evidence about what really works for students. We're about trying to push past stale dogmas on any side, whether there's dogmas of, some people think that the deep investments in communities aren't necessary to bring about transformation within the school. Some people think only what happens within the school is what's most essential for equity for our communities and families. But we believe very holistically we have to both support policies that will bring about transformation within our schools, because we absolutely need that. We need transformations in curriculum, we need transformations in pedagogy, instruction. We need more Black and brown folks in classrooms, more Black and brown folks running schools, more Black and brown folks on school boards, more Black and brown folks on the funder side, making decisions about how capital is allocated. But we also know that what happens in our schools is interconnected to the policies that affects what happens to our families and communities beyond the schoolhouse. And so we're really committed to pushing for evidence-based policies that will bring about change for all children, regardless of their background. And equity is just at the heart of that. It's at the equity of how we think about the campaigns we want to invest in. It's at the heart of the work we do to reimagine our organization, and that no matter what anybody's background is, that they kind of embrace these issues. And then ultimately, what's most important for us is making sure that the policies that we champion actually are making a difference in the lives of the kids that we're here to serve.
Thank you all for answering. I think that so much of what you all said overlap with this deep structural change, breaking glass ceilings, breaking generational curses, and really looking at this from a multi-tiered solution and multi-tiered problem-solving outlook. I think all of you are pioneers in education reform, so you all have seen a lot of changes, some for better, some for worse. If you could articulate, where have you witnessed growth in education reform, and what are some areas that you think still need to change?
I'll jump in. I think, an education reform is a very broad topic, but given that we're here, under the Alliance's platform, I'll talk about the charter issue in particular. There's obviously many other issues that relate to ed reforms, but on the charter issue, I think some CMO networks have done a lot of good work to diversify who's in the classroom and who's leading schools. So I think many CMO networks are much better now than where they may have been about 10 years ago in terms of, as I said, diversifying who's in classrooms, particularly more Black and brown folks in classrooms, who's leading schools, more Black and brown folks leading schools. So I think that's very positive. I've seen some growth around rethinking discipline. And I think sometimes people paint with too broad a brush. Some charter schools, I think, were a bit too heavy-handed with, a rigid approach to discipline on, frankly, minor infractions. And that's just something, particularly when we talk about Black and brown children. We need to be very careful about that and, frankly, not do that, because that's how police engage with Black and brown bodies, where they're over-policed and over-prosecuted for oftentimes minor infractions. So I've been happy to see some growth in that area, but we still have work to do. I mean, there's still too many CMOs where there isn't the diversity in the classrooms or in the leadership that we ought to be. And again, that also plays out not only in Black and brown folks executing someone else's curriculum vision, but actually Black and brown folks having the power to set their own vision, their own curriculum, their own vision of what the pedagogy ought to be. I think there's a whole nother level, though, we have to get to as a sector in terms of significant amounts of capital in the hands of Black and brown leaders. I just think that's the space where we just haven't really gotten to where we need to get. There's been some growth. I mean, there's definitely certain portfolios which are very positive. Like, for example, the work Darryl Cobb does, that's amazing work. So that's tremendous work, and that's a sign of growth. But when you look at, if you just look across our sector, whether it's charter schools, whether it's entities that engage in advocacy around charter schools, whether it's teacher pipeline programs, organizations run by Black and brown folks get pennies on the dollar. And so that's just very problematic. And then oftentimes, even if they get money, it may be very short-term money. And when you get short-term money, you really just can't lay out your vision, right? You got to constantly feel a need to have to, adhere to where oftentimes the donors are. So I think we have to continue to push our philanthropic partners, who again have made good progress, or made some progress, I'll say. So we're not where we used to be, but we got to diversify, get more capital in large amounts of capital that's long-term patient capital in the hands of Black and brown entrepreneurs and school leaders. And connected to that, we need more Black and brown folks on the funder side making decisions because it's all interconnected, right? Black and brown entrepreneurs tend not to get the capital, and then you look at too many of our funders, there's not really many Black and brown folks in position of authority to really move capital. And so we have to get to the next level there, because until we get there, we're not going to see the transformations in what's happening on the ground that we need to see. And frankly, as we engage in those transformations, the work is going to look different to many communities, it's going to look different to different stakeholders, and not only look different, it's going to be different. And that difference is going to be strength, is going to be power, which is only going to strengthen the sector in so many different ways.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry to jump in.
You can go ahead, Margaret. No problem. Yeah.
So I've really seen a real uptick in charter schools run by Black and brown people. And my network, I have a network of 9 charter schools in Sacramento and San Bernardino, California. The majority of my board is Black. I've been the CEO for 11 years. 60% of our teachers are people of color. Of that number, 30% are Black. That matters in California because Blacks only represent 6% of the population. And we got there by driving our own agenda, by Black people saying, what do we imagine is the education we want to have for our own children? And let's go after it and create a system of public schools that is designed to close the African-American achievement gap by preparing kids for college starting in kindergarten. And we really went as a community in Sacramento and San Bernardino through a vision process. We literally closed our eyes and said, let's imagine the schools that we want. Open your eyes and write it down. And we built a system of charter schools based on those imaginings. And when we imagine for ourselves, our high school students go to a STEAM high schools, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, and earn their associate's degree in general science at the same time that they get their high school diploma. So they're entering the University of California or the California State University as juniors. When we imagine for ourselves, we have not just a music program, but an HBCU-style drum line in Sacramento, California. And our drum leader is a Grammy Award-winning drummer from Sly and the Family Stone. When we imagine for ourselves, we're the second highest achieving school system in mathematics in our county. We want number one. But for kids that look like ours and with our income level, which 85% of them are on free and reduced price lunch, they're usually at the bottom of academic achievement, not at the top. So when we imagine for ourselves, and I think this is a change in school reform and in the ed reform community, and what happens when Black and Latino people create their own schools, we imagine excellence. And we deliver on that excellence. And the conversation about Black students doesn't center around discipline. It centers around imagination and intellectualism and the arts and the sciences. It engages the entire community. Our school system is a partnership with the Black press because we know that the Black press celebrates the stories of Black people as opposed to having us on the news as a suspect. They have us on the news as a graduate. We also engage all the Black community organizations that are the civil rights organizations that we are so active in my community. For us, it's California State NAN. The other thing I want to point to is that there's in this time when charter schools are being so attacked, what is also under attack is the self-determination of Black and brown people to say, this is the school I want my child to go to. And what I also see as a change in the education reform community is whereas Black and brown people may have sat back in the past and waited for the permission or the lead of predominantly white organizations to carry the message about school reform, you see us carrying it ourselves. I'm very proud to be the co-chair of Freedom Coalition for Charter Schools. And right now, in partnership with DFER, we are taking it to Biden's platform committee to say that we don't want to see negative anti-charter school language in the Democratic Party platform. And in this moment in time, it really is Black and brown leadership that has to articulate that message, because we will be the ones to suffer the most if choice is taken away from Black and brown families.
Thank you so much. Layla, if you want to jump in, please feel free.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, one of the biggest shifts that we have seen is really thinking about the needs of kids beyond just what happens in the four classrooms. And so I think that in the early days, I think of the charter movement, there was, and certainly this was the case for those of us who went through Teach for America, for example. It was like, focus on the classroom, focus what happens within the four walls. And if you just teach the heck out of these kids, right, you will undo all the effects of poverty, right? That was sort of the direct and indirect message that we found. And certainly, like, great teachers can do wonderful things, can do amazing things. And a lot of us are evidence of that, right? But, what we were ignoring were some of the real challenges that, Black and Latino children face at home. And I think one of the big shifts that I have seen is a focus on some of these challenges. And I think, Afrika, you as a KIPP alum probably saw this at some point where KIPP was on the Hill advocating for their DACA students, right? Thinking about the immigration issues that were present in the Latino community, the increased deportations, right? The uncertainty of DACA students and DACA teachers. I think that, again, sort of KIPP was one of the sort of key CMOs that did the study around, whether their kids were getting not just to college, but through college, and a real acknowledgement that they had to do better to ensure that kids were getting through higher education. And so there was a much greater focus. I think in the area of COVID-19, we saw a lot of CMOs really focus their attention on providing the basic needs for their communities, right? They were offering gift cards for groceries. They were ensuring that kids had other resources to be, if they were housing insecure. So this real acknowledgement of the fact that, kids do face and families face a lot of challenges. And there are certainly things that CMOs have done to help address some of those needs so that, again, kids are able to meet their full potential and show up to school or to virtual school really ready to learn. I think that has been a really big shift, and since the early days, I think, of charter schools that I think is really important because, again, there are a lot of challenges that communities of colors are grappling with.
Layla, thank you so much for actually raising that, because that you touched on two questions that I want to get to. And thank you all actually for sharing. And I want to remind the audience watching and listening in that you can submit your questions and we'll get to them in about 10 to 15 minutes. So you can live submit them and we'll go through and look at them. So Layla, you mentioned the philosophy of keeping things within the four walls, and education inequality mirrors societal inequality. And we know this because with COVID, when schools had to shut down, the biggest concern was, well, how are people going to eat? And the fact that, and people were like, well, the school's shutting down and kids aren't going to be able to eat. And the fact that kids had to rely on schools to eat shows you that we have an issue providing the basic resources in this country. That's not in a school inequality issue. That is an American inequality issue. I, as a Black student, I attended Kip Star, born and raised in Harlem, low income area at the time that was also going through this huge gentrification shift. So I witnessed police brutality. Our George Floyd at the time was Sean Bell. And then it just kept happening and happening. We watched classes and we watched gentrification come and change our buildings and mass lock up all of our classmates. We grew up around gang violence, drug use, suffered from PTSD, CPTSD, and inherited lots of trauma. How are you all mindful about addressing other structural systems of inequality alongside education inequality? How do you make sure that when you implement your strategies of education reform and school leadership and pipeline programs and getting, money and focusing on politicians, how do you make sure that you keep these things in mind that are outside of the four classrooms? Because I think that that's a huge thing that needs to be addressed. And by the way, you all can just jump in. I won't say if you want to speak. If you want to speak, you can.
Well, we have so what we do is, of course, we center our work around educational equity. And of course, that's a space that is huge. And there's all types of ways in which education has been used to sustain and perpetuate racial injustice for a long period of time. One of the first things that happened with African Americans who had been made slaves in this country was that it actually became a crime in the antebellum South to teach Black people who Southerners viewed as slaves to teach them how to read, right? Because there was an understanding that to the extent that there was something about education that is fundamentally different than enslavement, that freedom is, education is connected to freedom. And so we definitely are intentional to center our work in the educational space because that is just a huge domain where we've seen racial injustice practiced, but we do significant coalition work with partners in these other areas. So whether it's economic opportunity work we'll do with groups like the National Urban League or UniDose or the Black Economic Alliance. We work with a variety of different partners. So when Trump wanted to rescind DACA and to immigrate, our immigrant babies, we work with a variety of different coalition partners on that. We have a network with people on the Hill that will push on a variety of different intersectional issues. So for example, Trump, many of his budgets would seek to basically eviscerate the social safety net that undergirds so many of our communities in terms of investments in affordable housing and job training opportunities. And mental health services. So when we wanted to cut that, we worked with civil rights partners. So we tend to focus more on our kind of what I would call coalition work. We're primarily focused on educational equity, and we're just very glad that we have partners like, for example, Brian Stevenson. You want to do mass incarceration work? Our view is it doesn't make sense for DFER, which has a certain expertise around education, to then do mass incarceration. But what we'll do is let's amplify the work of Brian. If we have sponsorship dollars, let's sponsor people like Brian. When we're in front of policymakers who want to really be thoughtful about how do we reimagine mass incarceration, deal with how racial injustice plays out in that space, hey, we got to bring in Brian, right? So what we work to do is be clear about what we're centered in, because that's a space where, frankly, we don't have enough advocates pushing for education to really be a tool for liberation for people of color. But then where can we partner with our coalition allies to push on these other issues, which is so, as you know, Africa is so interconnected with what happens to our babies in school.
I think this is another area where it underscores the importance of having Black and Latino educators actually run the schools. Because I'm an example of an educator. I'm from Sacramento. I was born and raised there. So I'm operating schools in my hometown. And what we've done is we've created an ecosystem for the Black community. So there's really no major Black organization in Sacramento that doesn't have some hand in Fortune School, whether it's a seat on the board to participate in our governance structure, or it's because they're running a mentoring program for Black boys, and so we bring them in to serve that function. Or if they advocate politically, like California State NAN, which is Al Sharpton's affiliate in California that I'm on the board of. Or it's the Sacramento Black Chamber of Commerce, or the Black newspaper. These schools are truly what the community does for itself when it has the opportunity. And so what that means is that we're bringing in a lot of resources that are outside the four walls of the classroom that were designed by Black people to be supportive of Black people in the various challenges that we have, in life. And, some things would just never occur to us to do. Like when I was a kid, I grew up, when I went to high school, it was in Inglewood, and it was during the war on drugs. And so we were routinely stopped by the police on the way out of school. And our batons for track and field were confiscated as weapons. So it would never occur to me to put police officers in the school, because I experienced what it felt like to be policed as a teenager, and the fear of being in the streets of LA and seeing cops with semi-automatic weapons. So it just would never occur to me to create a school space that's designed to be nurturing for Black children and introduce that element into our environment. And I think that that's the importance of having Black people and Latino people at the forefront. And now it's particularly important because, if we do our work properly, we'll have Biden as president. But we have to make sure that Biden just doesn't embrace Barack Obama in name only, but also in his policies. Barack Obama understood how severely underserved Black and Latino children are in the public schools. He was not endorsed by the teachers' unions, and therefore he had leverage in the conversation to push the envelope to say that Black and brown people need choices, and we need a proliferation of schools that they create themselves so that there can be academic rigor and so that they can take their proper place in society. It's very troubling to me that Biden has in his ear Randy Weingarten, who is driving the education agenda in America for a future Biden administration. I mean, let's be real about it. The American Federation of Teachers represents cops. It's a part of their public safety agenda at a time when America is rolling back the presence of cops in schools. You have the Biden whisperer, Randy Weingarten, who represents the cops, in addition to teachers. So you talk about an infrastructure that supports the school to prison pipeline. I'm not interested in having that voice dictate Black education in America. There has to be balance in this discussion. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves pleased that Trump is out of office, but in the back seat in a Democratic Party that is against parent choice in charter schools.
So one of the ways that Education Leaders of Color tries to focus on sort of these other social issues and social policies is through our grant-making arm. So, you heard Shavar talk about the need for more resources being channeled to Black and Latino leaders. And we created what we call the Boulder Fund, which is our grant-making arm to channel more resources, both financial and non-financial, to leaders, values-aligned leaders of color who are part of our network. And so over the last 3 years, we've invested about $2.3 million in 21 leaders. And the kinds of things that we are funding are intersectional approaches to solving educational issues. So to give you some examples of this, we have an entrepreneur, Marvin Pierre, who runs a program in Houston, which is focused on getting kids coming out of the juvenile justice system to get the skills, to get jobs, and to get the social emotional support that they need to sort of re-enter society, right? These are kids where the school system has told them that they don't want them back in the school system. So he is ensuring that they are attaining either their high school diplomas or their GEDs to be able to then enter the job market, get training, and really, eventually enter college and enter the middle class. And so his approach is not just looking at high school graduation rates, right? But he's looking to ensure that he is addressing the school to prison pipeline, right? By ensuring that they have access to jobs, by ensuring that he is partnering with the local school system and the juvenile justice system to create alternative approaches to what we do when kids are not successful in school, right? And so he's thinking very much in a cross-sector way. We have another young entrepreneur out of Arizona who is working with DACA students and helping them, providing them with social emotional support while also advocating for ensuring that DACA students can actually remain and hopefully attain a new status if, when we can pass comprehensive immigration reform in the United States. So we're very much about not just investing in educators who are thinking sort of beyond education, but also lifting up these examples for other leaders who work in education to think more holistically about how can we actually think about these cross-sector approaches to solving our educational issues. And we're seeing more and more examples of like that, certainly in the charter world as well, right? I love the example that Margaret provided around students who enter, high school and they leave with an associate's degree, right? Like that is a very really innovative cross-sector approach. You're exposing kids to college early, you're saving them some money. Like it has, and we know, right, what the cost of college is and what happens to students of color. And it's a way to save money and in a lot of ways, getting them on a faster path to the middle class where they are not burdened with the kinds of debt that a lot of students are when they leave college. And so that's one of the ways that we really think more holistically about the needs of Black and Brown students.
Thank you so much. And Margaret, thank you so much for directly calling out the school to prison pipeline and stating how you want to dismantle police presence. And Layla, the example you gave about working with juvenile justice reform is so important, especially for me, because I am formerly incarcerated and I was a high performing student at KIPP. I got incarcerated and it was KIPP star teachers and leaders that came to the courtroom, advocated on my behalf. And when I came home, helped me get into college. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have graduated from college. I wouldn't have become a Fulbright scholar and gone on to continue to do these things. And this is why I continue to work with them to say, hey, every student may not perform well academically, and some may even stray off the path. It's just the reality of, where we are. So we need to make sure that we do have these programs that not only disrupt the school to prison pipeline, but reroute it. So I think that's really, really important. I'm glad both of you raised those points. So I have one last question, and then we're going to move into the Q&A section. I wanted to backtrack a bit. In the beginning, I asked you all about your leadership philosophies, and I wanted you all to apply it now in the time of COVID, because everyone now, as I was listening to the keynote this morning, and one of the presenters was saying, a principal said, this year, everybody is a new principal. Everybody is a new teacher because everything is going to be completely different. So as we're living through this pandemic, how have you all had to adapt and shift your leadership models? How have you risen to this challenge, and how has it pushed your limits as education leaders? And if you can, I want you all to try to, or some of you to answer the question, what are the unique challenges specifically that Black and Brown students will face with these virtual learning mandates? And then also how to sustain teachers and foster this community and trust that you all have also mentioned, the importance of community. You've all said that. So how are you all going to continue to maintain those things? And you don't have to answer all of that, but if you can touch on a couple of those topics, that would be helpful.
Afrika, one of the things that I was just surprised by and just energized by was when we had to close the schools in March and it was time to give out Chromebooks to families. We made our announcements that we'll give out a Chromebook to every child. And parents showed up an hour early and the cars were wrapped around the school to pick up those Chromebooks. At a time when I think the media was underestimating the extent to which Black and Latino parents not just wanted food, but wanted the education to continue, those parents were ready. Give me the Chromebook, let's go. And I just was really feeling like our school community took an approach of one, maintaining the academic program. It's not enough to just hand out the food. You have to maintain the academic program and give parents what they signed up for, even if it is virtually. We checked in with our non-classroom based colleagues who have just been totally lambasted by the educational establishment. And now, ironically, we can all learn a lesson from them because now we're all suddenly homeschooling. The other thing that we did was really intentionally made it a celebratory environment. And I think that so much about school is meeting people where they are, because so many of our parents are millennials. We did a lot on social media and really increased that engagement. For example, our principals every morning have their morning meeting on Facebook Live. And that became a celebratory environment. And some of our parents engaged more via Facebook Live than they did in person. And it just became another form of outreach. We just got the mandate in California that we're to start with 100% distance learning. And we are ready for it. Like so many charter schools across the country, we're ready for it and offering solid academic programs. I think that in terms of leadership, people trust people, not institutions. So it was important for me, Afrika, to speak directly to parents through video, through popping in on Facebook Live, to keep our principals very present and accessible, to give these messages and bring along our school community in as personable a way as possible, as opposed to sending letters from the institution. And then also to assure our school staff that, you've got a job. And because we have the privilege of working in this environment, it means we're going to do our job. And we're going to serve kids to the best of our ability and keep our school community together.
So sorry, Shavar, do you want to go? Okay.
No,
so thanks. So one of the things that we became very aware of very quickly is that, COVID-19 was having a disproportionate effect on Black and Brown communities. And we knew that very quickly because, when we talked to sort of our white peer organizations, they'd say like, oh, everyone in my family is safe, everything is great, like I feel so lucky. And when we talked to people in our network, in our community, like week after week, we heard of people who had been personally affected by the pandemic, either they themselves or family members, right, or very close friends. Like in the Black and Brown community, we were seeing a disproportionate impact. And so the approach that we took is, we have to make sure that we are tending to like the whole leader, right? So we put a lot of programming in place to ensure that people had a space to talk about the pandemic, to think about their financial stability during this time, because we know that a lot of people of color don't just take care of, their two children, but you oftentimes have parents and aunties and cousins, et cetera. And so we really took an approach to really think about how do we address the needs of our leaders. And the reason why we took that approach is because we wanted to make sure that our leaders were able to show up as their whole selves and meet their full potential to support our communities, our students, our parents, and our families. And so for us, the impact was really seeing the disproportionate impact in our communities and then responding by supporting our leaders and in a way that was going to allow them to show up for their teachers, for their parents, and their students.
I would just
Thank
say
you
briefly.
so much. Okay, if you can say it in 1 minute, so we can get to at least one question, and then we have to wrap up. I'm so sorry.
15 seconds. I would just say in the policy landscape, we've just seen that there aren't enough districts that have brought the energy that Margaret talked about, where she and her team just worked to make it happen to ensure that learning continued. Many districts just simply said it was too hard to figure out how to provide an instructional program in a social distancing environment. Some other districts and some other individual school leaders, and I think the charter really led the way, were much more entrepreneurial, nimble to not only get the broadband and the Chromebooks for students, but to actually have an instructional program. That's going to be something we have to keep our eyes on as we enter the fall.
Thank you so much. So we have time for just one question. We had a lot of really good ones in the Q&A. So one I'm going to ask here is from David from Baltimore County Public Schools, I believe. How do the panelists respond to critics that argue charter schools redirect funds and resources away from already underfunded public schools, many that currently serve students of color?
I would say first, all of us should fight for more investments in public education. So we in our organization, we do that all the time. We're always fighting to get federal and state governmental actors to invest more in public schools, district and charters. That's number one. Number two, we would also say that for those who are worried about disinvestment, all of these folks who moved to suburbs, they should come back to the cities. Right? I mean, a lot of largely white and middle-class people moved to suburbs over the last couple of generations. And now that some of us say that low-income Black and brown folks should be able to make some decisions too, we hear these sort of arguments. So for those, and oftentimes I hear this from the white progressives, so if they really believe in that, come back and invest in the cities, but not in a gentrifying way, but in a more way that's that partnership. And then finally, I'll say some states will provide some transition dollars because it actually works both ways. Right, you have in some communities families leaving some charters to go back to the district. You have some leaving district to go to the charter. So some states will have transition dollars. But at the end of the day, for me and for our organization, we believe that what should drive it is the parent's decision. And so if the school isn't providing a quality enough education that the parent wants it, these other arguments shouldn't trump the ability of a parent to make a decision about what's best in the best interest of their child, which is what middle-class families do all the time. They move to suburbs looking for better schools. They'll access private school. In cities like where I'm from, if you know somebody on the school board, you know somebody in the mayor's office, you can call downtown and get your child placed to a school other than your local school. Because low-income families don't have those options. So the idea that when we want to empower Black and brown folks who might be low-income, we speak to these other reasons that people seem not to have a problem with when others make decisions. It should be the same for our communities as well.
Here for Shavar's answer, and I will just build by saying charter schools are public schools, and the money should follow the child to the public school of the parent's choice. I do want to pivot to some questions about how to communicate with Vice President Biden about charter schools. It's a critical time right now because the Democratic Party is developing its platform. And Shavar is really the expert in this and can tell us that on Monday, they're actually going to vote to adopt that platform. And right now, the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force has issued some anti-charter school recommendations that the DNC is now considering. There is a process that the DNC has created where you can go on their website and submit a video to give your feedback on the platform. You can also go to Freedom Coalition for Charter Schools website and get information about what the anti-charter school provisions are and how to go ahead and give your input to the Democratic Party. The important thing is that we say something, that we not wait for somebody else to say it, that you get in there and say it yourself, that you tell your story about the school community that you've built, about how important it is for families to have options and for charter schools to be among those options, that we don't sit on our hands and wait for something to happen to us or wait for some or other organization to take the lead. There have to be your voices. Your voice matters. And now is the time to contact the Democratic Party directly and weigh in with the DNC platform committee. Shavar, is there more you can say to be more specific to give people who are looking for that type of counsel about what do we do, those direct actions?
Yeah, no, this is very important. As Margaret said, I mean, the draft of the Democratic Party's platform has a principle in there that would require charter schools applying for federal funding to get the pre-approval of the district before the charter can receive that funding. And of course, the district oftentimes is the exact space that a family wants an alternative to. So the idea that there should be the pre-approval from the system that many of our families want to do something else, that's problematic. And so as Margaret said, weighing in, with the DNC platform process, they're voting on Monday about this. The Freedom Coalition website is this great place to do that because it's really critical that they have to hear the voices of parents and families, in particular our charter leaders of color, because they just don't have the sense of what we know, which is, this is a space that's about equity. This is a space that's done great things for many families of color. Not perfect, no space is perfect, but it's done many great things. And that's precisely why parents and families have embraced this sector. They need to hear that now. They need to continue to hear it because not only is this an important decision point in terms of what the values are of the Democratic Party as reflected in the platform, if Biden becomes president, he's going to appoint an education secretary. It's going to be very important for that person to be someone who embraces the idea that charters are an important and essential part, of course, we would argue, part of public education. This is not zero sum. So even the question we got before, some people try to make it sound like it's either or. We want strong traditional public education. We want strong investments in traditional public education, just like we want investments in the public charter sector. And then, of course, we believe the parents should make those options. But the most essential thing is they're just not hearing from our parents, our families, our community-based leaders. We have to make our voices heard before Monday. And Monday is just one stop among many. You got to raise your voice over the next few months so that if Biden is the next president, that he knows that we have a sector that he has to be responsive to.
Thank you so much. We've officially reached our time. I just want to, again, state so much gratitude and thanks to Shavar, Margaret, and Layla for giving us your time, your energy, your thoughts on this topic. I think it feels like we've been talking for 5 minutes and it's been 45. It's the issue with educators that we can talk so much, even about education. Thank you all again. Thank you all for the audience members that asked questions. Thank you for showing up today, bringing open minds and a willingness to participate, and most of all, want to incite change. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference and everyone has a wonderful day.